We are joined now by Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. He's on the Ohio State beat. Kyle, thank you for spending some time with us this evening. And let's pick up right where Ryan Day left off at running back position. It was a position that we thought was going to be a major need just 6-7 months ago. But Trey Sermon then transferred in. He is healthy. And Master Teague, because of the delayed start of the season, Master Teague's going to be ready to go this Saturday against Nebraska.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the irony of like these two massive things happened to Ohio State. Number one, the pandemic kind of canceling spring practice and Master Teague's injury is basically the reason Trey Sermon came. I mean, I doubt he would have come to Ohio State if not for that. I mean, maybe he still would have because there was still a need because they lost J.K. Dobbins. But then the delayed start is huge in Master Teague rehabbing from his Achilles injury. He's going to be healthy this season. I mean, I know they lost a 2,000-yard back in J.K. Dobbins, but I think collectively this year, along with a really, really good offensive line, that their run game will be as good, if not better, than it was last year. I think Sermon is just a perfect combination of pass catcher, runner, pass blocker for a Ryan Day offense. I mean, I think he's going to have a dynamite year. I know he's talked about a lot, but I think he should be talked about a lot more as one of the more dynamic players in the country for this season. And I think Master Teague's, got a strong future ahead of him. I mean, he was pretty good last year. Wasn't great though in the Clemson game once Dobbins was injured. And he was a true backup last year. I mean, there weren't a whole lot of yards that were gained at consequential moments. But still, I mean, he was a freshman and he was a second string guy and he was third team All Big Ten. So that really says a lot of the talent that he is.
Let's talk a little bit about that offensive line. On Tuesday, we learned what a lot of people had assumed, that Nicholas Petit-Frere will get that start at right tackle as he edges out. He's a five-star guy. He edges out another five-star guy, Paris Johnson, because that's what Ohio State does. They bring in 5 stars upon 5 stars upon 5 stars. And the other missing link on that offensive line, Harry Miller, will get the start as well. So the offensive line is now in place with Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis as well. So that, as you mentioned, that offensive line looks to be the strength perhaps of the Ohio State offense.
Yeah, I mean, those 3 definitive starters, I mean, there's just nothing really to worry about there. I think that they're totally solidified. They're good. I don't think you're going to really have to worry about, busted assignments or anything from those guys. I think Petit-Frere, at least personally for me, is the most interesting of the linemen. Came in as super, hyped guy, a 5-star, as you mentioned. I think One Service maybe even had him as the number 1 overall player in the country. I don't want to say he's not lived up to expectations yet, but he maybe hasn't kind of been as big a part of things as people would have thought at this point in his career. Struggled a little in the Northwestern game last year when he had a chance. So I think he's the guy to look at it, and he's at a pretty important position in the offense. But I mean, Greg Studrawa has really proven himself to be a great coach and certainly a good recruiter as well. So, I mean, I do think that other year last year in 2019 of kind of getting to know things a little bit more probably helped Petit-Frere. And I expect him, by the second half of this season, maybe to really solidify himself as an all Big Ten caliber offensive lineman.
Speaking of Coach Stud, the Northwest Ohio native, we don't frequently get to listen to Coach Stud, get to talk to Coach Stud. He's not a big fan of doing media responsibilities, but we did get a chance to talk to him earlier this week. And he was pretty blunt that when he found out Wyatt Davis would be back, he said, yeah, there probably was a couple of hallelujahs and amens being shouted out from the Studrawa household once he knew he had Wyatt Davis back on that line. And also had, as you mentioned, had some very nice things to say about Petit-Frere particularly. And I think the interesting thing that he talked about was a lot of those offensive linemen during the quarantine period, they had to go home, and he was very concerned about whether they could keep up the same level of diet at home. And Ohio State actually ended up sending out some supplementary food for those guys to eat at home to kind of help out the parents at home.
Yeah, and I think Petit-Frere, he was the one who was trying to do the pull-ups on his downspout or whatever at his house and kind of broke it off. That was a funny story back in the summer. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of an undercovered story of this whole situation when it comes to Ohio State, is just how entrenched and serious their players took like the continuation of training while they were at home. whether it was eating right, working out. I actually visited Dallas Gant in May. I mean, that was kind of early on, and it still seemed like a season was for sure going to happen at that point. But he was doing all kinds of stuff at his house in Springfield Township, and wasn't missing a meal. His mom was doing all sorts of cooking for him and things like that. And that's the other part of, like, Ohio State's players are going to be locked in. I don't think you're going to see issues with them, over celebrating on Saturday night and going out and, leaving their houses or apartments. You haven't really seen major problems with Clemson once they restarted. They've taken their game serious as well. A lot of these teams have been a little sloppy, and there've been a lot of upsets. Clemson's been totally locked in. I expect the same out of Ohio State. Alabama certainly has looked very good offensively. I just think the teams that have so much at stake understand the situation they have, the opportunity they have, and they're not going to mess around.
We've certainly seen it in Ohio and society at large, the COVID fatigue and maybe letting down our guard a little bit. And that's something that Ryan Day talked about, that they can't let that to happen for the Buckeyes. They're so locked in on the season that he's going to continue to preach to these guys. We've got to stay, as Jim Harbaugh said, virus strong, as Ryan Day said, COVID strong.
Yeah, I mean, the culture of these programs, I mean, it just means so much. I mean, players feed off what their coaches say. I mean, we see it every year with a bunch of teams. I mean, if you have a great culture and the coach preaches this message, I mean, generally they listen, especially a guy like Ryan Day, who I wrote about this week, kind of about his leadership and how much his players love him. Like, they're going to respond to what he says. So I just would be stunned if Ohio State had any major issues or an outbreak or anything. I think it'd also be hard to have an outbreak just with the daily testing. You can kind of isolate the players who test positive. But yeah, I think they definitely are taking this very serious. I think the university at large too was interesting this week. The Zoom call they had with Gene Smith and the event management people, the chief of police, just what campus is going to be like on Saturday. They're urging Ohio State fans, hey, we love you. We want you to watch us, but please just watch us with, like, your family. Don't invite your whole neighborhood over. You can all, Zoom together or talk on the phone about the game or whatever, but they do not want their games to become super spreader events.
How concerned are you with the Ohio State backup quarterback position? Obviously, we know Justin Fields is entrenched as the starter, but as we saw last year, he went down against Penn State, missed a couple of plays against Michigan, and Chris Chuganoff came in, kept that drive alive, allowed Justin to come back in and throw that touchdown pass to Garrett Wilson. They don't have a set backup right now. It's a battle between Gunnar Hoke, who's a transfer graduate student type of quarterback, and then two true freshmen in Jack Miller and C.J. Stroud.
I mean, it's definitely an area of concern for Ohio State, just because there's a big drop-off, number one, after Justin Fields. And number two, like you said, I wouldn't call him injury prone, but his just style of play lends itself to, possibly getting nicked up. I think he learned a lot last year, just how the season went against the Big Ten and maybe protecting himself more. So I don't know if Fields will put himself in positions as much this year where he might get injured. But I don't know. I fully expect if something happened and they needed a guy to come in, that it would be CJ Stroud, just because his style of play lends itself to what Ryan Day and this offense is. That also maybe depends on the time of year it happened. I mean, if Justin Fields goes down Saturday, I can't imagine CJ Stroud's coming in, a guy who, was in high school last year. I think Gunnar Hoke and his experience would be the one, but I don't know. I really think CJ Stroud, the things he does, he's just so impressive. He looks like the quarterback of the future to me for Ohio State.
Let's talk defense. Once again, Ohio State has to replace a lot of talent in the secondary, much like a sigh of relief when Wyatt Davis came back, a big sigh of relief from Kerry Combs when Shaun Wade announced, yes, he would come back after briefly opting out when it looked like there wouldn't be a Big Ten season. So you got Shaun Wade coming back, and then some young heralded DBs. Again, it's 5 stars replacing 5 stars, but they're untested 5 stars in that secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sevyn Banks is the guy to keep an eye on. I'm on the bandwagon for him. I think he's due for a massive breakout year. We've seen him make big plays in his career already. Certainly the Michigan game a couple years ago stands out. I think he's got all the tools to be one of these great Ohio State defensive backs. And I know Shaun Wade's the only guy back, but I guess number one, I believe in Kerry Combs and how good of a coach he is and how much he can groom these guys. And I just believe in Ohio State and the talent they have. I don't see that position being a weakness this year. I mean, that maybe sounds crazy to some people, but I just think that they have so much credibility in just turning these guys over and not really having a drop off. So I don't see why 2020 all of a sudden would be different. And then like the other positions, defensive line, I think that is loaded. Even though they do lose Chase Young, I think Tyreek Smith and Zach Harrison are primed to kind of take that next step. Certainly they're not going to have someone who's as much of a difference maker and as much of a headache for opposing offenses as Chase Young was last year. But a little bit like running back, I think combined those guys and Jonathan Cooper as well, who pretty much missed all of last season, will kind of create their own sort of havoc and stuff the stat sheet as well.
Saturday, Ohio State, Nebraska. You'll be one of the fortunate few that will be able to attend the game. Of course, we know limited fans, limited member of media allowed in the game. We talked to Gene Smith earlier this week, and he said he was at the point where he was no longer worried about everything else. He was in game mode. But let me ask you this, Kyle. When you're at the shoe Saturday, are you going to be focused more on the game or focused more on how surreal an environment it's going to be without the marching band, without Brutus, without 105,000 fans, because there'll only be about 1,000 fans there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I certainly both. I mean, I'll obviously be watching the game and pay attention to that. But I mean, there'll be a whole lot of kind of looking around and, wondering what kind of dream I'm in or the apocalypse or something. It'll be bizarre. There's no doubt. I mean, 1,600 total people, it sounds like, but that includes just every single person in the stadium. In the stands, I guess it's 656 plus 400. That's what, 1,056. I mean, in a 100,000 seat stadium, and especially up high in that press box, you've been there. I mean, those people are going to look like ants. It's basically going to look like there's no one in there. But I mean, I guess we're just happy, football's here. I do still think it'll be exciting. It'll feel legitimate. I don't think it'll feel like it's a practice or a scrimmage or whatever. Maybe against Rutgers, it'll feel that way. But I mean, I think Saturday against Nebraska, I think next week against Penn State, yes, it'll feel surreal, but I still think it'll feel like it's an actual season. NFL games watching on TV, I mean, yeah, it's different when there aren't fans there, but it still seems like, hey, like this is football and this is, a real season.
All right, thank you very much, Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. Don't forget, you can read his stuff online at ToledoBlade.com and in the print editions.